Briefly, we're Resolve Collective. We're an interdisciplinary design collective that look at the space between architecture, art, engineering, and technology to address social challenges. A lot of our work has to do with kind of community engagement and also working with underrepresented groups in the built environment as well, which is why the topic of engagement during these times is such an interesting one for us and such a pertinent one. So that's going to be what we're talking about a little bit in more depth for the presentation. But before that, just some context, I think. And for those who don't know, the last talk that we did last week got Zoom bombed by I guess, what do you call it? Like it was by some trolls, I guess you would call them. But the attack took on a kind of explicitly racist nature. As the attackers kind of hurled racist abuse at Seth and I, and the talk had to be forced to be closed down. And I think why it's important to remember and why it's important to also bring this up and to highlight it is that at a time when we're all largely forced into kind of digital refuge, we do have to remember that the internet is a landscape that is at once both kind of a great equalizer and a great divider, and the vulnerabilities and social imbalances and social inequities that exist in real life are greatly exaggerated by the internet. And that's something that when we are engaging through this medium and we are kind of forced into these kind of relations, that we should remember in our professions and our social lives. And that's a real, and this was a real kind of learning lesson for us, and I'm sure for a lot of others who had the misfortune of being involved in that. In the actual event, there were just a few reflections from us and about how the whole thing manifested, and also what did it mean? Like, what did it mean to be explicitly addressed in a kind of derogatory racial way across the internet in front of, that many people, and that the kind of loss of agency and the helplessness that we experienced at that time, but also how progress and how labor and progress and work can be collapsed and can kind of be removed at that specific incident when that attack was happening. So the importance of us as young Black practitioners being in a space, albeit a digital one, that is largely white, but also kind of largely imbalanced, also largely imbalanced in terms of us being presented and there being others in the audience, is a kind of real imbalance and a real dynamic that we were kind of forced to grapple with. And in the outset, once it happened, we were talking to a lot of people, and a good friend of ours, or a friend of ours, Kitso Lynn Elliott, who's an artist in South Africa, sent me this quote from Toni Morrison. I just want to read it out because I think it's really pertinent to what happened, and also going forward. So what Toni Morrison said in this quote, she says, the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Someone says you have no language and you spend 20 years proving that you do. Someone says that your head isn't shaped properly and you have scientists working on the fact that it is. Someone says that you have no art, so you dredge that up. Someone said that you have no kingdoms, and so you dredge that up. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing. And so that's just a note I wanted to end on in terms of what happened and how that was experienced as well, and the importance of that moving forward. But a huge thank you to everyone who contacted us afterwards, who called us, who messaged us. That was really felt, and that was extremely important to us, especially in that time. And also huge shout out to the Architecture Foundation as well, for being so supportive and kind of like putting that message of solidarity out as well. So on to the main focus of today. So as I said before, we're a design collective.
Akil, your screen's on black still.
Oh, is it on black?
Yeah.
How long have they been on black for?
The whole time. But I
oh, really?
Yeah.
You think that was that like an effect, like a special
That's
effect?
Yeah.
Interrupt.
Here, let's see. Maybe if I take it off shared screen and put it back on. What do you think?
Yeah, try that. Well, that's actually better. Now we can see it.
What if I do it now? No?
No.
Back to black. All right, cool.
Yeah,
I'll just do it for now. So where were we? Read mode. Okay, cool. So, like I said before, we're a design studio that look at kind of various ways of engaging different people. So whether it's through kind of physical installations, working with a number of different groups as kind of long-term and short-term stakeholders in those projects, in those neighborhoods, looking at ideas of using your neighborhood and your environment as a resource, to kind of more specific and tailored workshops, often with younger age groups, but kind of more commonly now with a kind of whole range of demographics, all looking at how we can re-engage with our city centres, our built environments, how we can use design, space, architecture as a tool of empowerment. And like a number of other kind of design groups, I'm sure like everyone else at this time as well, like our work was greatly disrupted by COVID. And on the last talk that we gave a little insight into one of the projects that was based on Tufton Estate in South London, that got disrupted. And today, before kind of launching into the rest of the talk, we'd like to give another example of something that got disrupted, but that we had to kind of balance and then try and adapt for the digital landscape. And I think adapting for like a digital landscape is a phrase or a kind of an ask that has been thrown upon a number of different design studios. And I kind of think that's something that's also really pertinent for some of the guests that we brought on today and that they'll talk about as well, who I'll introduce a little bit later. So Seth, do you want to go for the introduce? Do you want to introduce?
Yeah, so we briefly went over this before we were interrupted last week, but so this was a project that we worked with the Kunstverein Art Gallery in Braunschweig, and the idea was that there's an African-born German philosopher called Anton Wilhelm Amo, who resided in this town Braunschweig for a lot of his early life, and this gallery wanted to do a response to his life and work, and fortunately they invited us to come out to the gallery and kind of do a physical installation and create a space that responded to his work but also reflected his life and his kind of journey as an African philosopher in kind of 18th century Europe. Without going too much into his work and his philosophy, he was a dualist. So that's his kind of big theory was a response to dualism. And we kind of looked through his work and we looked through a lot of his studies and tried to think about our own interpretation of the work that he did, and also a response to his circumstance. So as a member of the Black diaspora in that time in Germany, we thought it was a pretty interesting and also quite a kind of quite a relatable journey that he went through. So we were responding to his work as a kind of dualist theory and also as an African philosopher as well.
So the physical project was split into 3 different spheres of action. So one of those was a curatorial sphere. By doing that, we were gathering lots of different research, kind of written and also visual work on Amo and kind of placing that into a library type or an archive type of format in the space. The second was a programming sphere. So that was programming by invitation. So inviting people to be in the space and to kind of soak up some of those readings and those learnings, and also to embrace and understand his life, but through their own subjectivities. So through being in the space and through kind of really allowing that all that's being read and all that's being performed there to soak in. And then lastly was the spatial sphere, so the more typical physical side of the project, but through methods that we use based on the text. So we tried to kind of interpret Amo's dualist methods and use a number of different processes for materials in order to create that space.
And like a lot of our work, we had an idea and we had our own response, but we also wanted to work through those ideas with different communities within Braunschweig. So the first was a workshop that we did with a local secondary school. And what we did with them was we kind of translated our own material response. So we set out a few materials that we wanted to explore. We set out a few processes that we also wanted to explore and how they might relate to some of his work. And then we kind of set up a workshop and just chopped through all those materials. And this was an example of us going through the fabric whilst we were kind of getting them to cut and weave some of the fabric. But we had a day workshop where they really got to just test out every single material and go through the process that we were going to go through as practitioners. So
a project that was meant to go on or be in development for at least 3 weeks turned out to be a 24-hour job. And the day after that workshop, actually, we had to fly out of Germany because everything was locking down, and all galleries in Germany had closed. So we ended up having to fly back, and our expectation was that the project would be frozen. But luckily, because of the kind of really fantastic response from the gallery and also from different artists within there as well, there was an onus on the project continuing in a digital sphere, in a digital form. And so we worked really closely with the Kunstverein to think about how that project and how those three initial spheres could exist online, and how that we could engage with people in Braunschweig whilst people are on lockdown as well. So it took it took on the three spheres, and those were translated digitally. The first was a visual project, so reimagining how that space might look through the material processes, but with a number of different elements incorporated through additional research done from the time spent at home, being at home, just reading books. And that in itself tailored off into a really exciting kind of parallel project. So one was visual research into Black figures in 15th to 18th century European paintings. And then another was, and the second sphere was also, and so another parallel side of that as well was taking those material processes and taking that workshop that we did that you saw Seth there with the primary school, and really trying to open source that. So taking those methods and letting those become accessible to everyone digitally, and so that people can do those in their home while they're being locked down. And that's being developed currently with them into a microsite on their kind of main site. And then the last aspect of that as well was to collate all those materials, all of readily available materials that were free on the internet, into a codified library through which people could access and read themselves, but also a physical element. So the gallery were very keen that people might be able to borrow the books and the materials from the physical library, even during lockdown, through a process of kind of either working with a local bookstore or arriving at the gallery to borrow the books and then hand it back, I'm sure, with like lots of Dettol spray and this kind of thing. So that was a really interesting side of it that we were able to develop. And of course also the program, which hopefully once things kick back off, will kick back off too. So last session we talked about the three kind of considerations that we had for engagement in the time of kind of Corona, and what these times have kind of forced different people to do, and considerations that everyone should be taking, and that we certainly were taking with any existing projects during lockdown. The first one was a kind of an emphasis on people's personal circumstances, so personal safety, personal health, family health, employment situations and circumstances had become a priority. If they weren't before, they certainly are now, and that creates a hierarchy of information, and really leads to lends itself to that question of whether or not it's appropriate to engage with other projects, for example, with master plans, with built projects at such time. The second one was digital literacy, and almost harking back to the point that we were making before about the racist attack. The internet is a place of inequities, and access is also one of them. So the digital literacy of lots of those who are underrepresented, who would normally take precedence in trying to engage, is emphasized and exaggerated over the internet. And then the third is a really obvious one, but one I think that really needs to be said, is that the city itself has changed, and that people are behaving differently. And if our engagement is investigative, and if our engagement aims to uncover a picture of the city, that picture of the city would have fundamentally shifted in its nature, because people aren't using space in the same ways. So those are the three different circumstances that we're talking about. And we had three questions that we asked the audience. The first was, how are you doing it? So it was an open question to how people are doing that. That's something we would really be interested. We're really interested in finding out from our guests, as well as finding out from you guys as well in the audience. The second was, how are you or others thinking about it? So if you aren't doing it, how are you thinking about it? How are you thinking about the present, the past, the future, and these kind of things? And then the third is, what's the point? So is there even any point in continuing with engagement projects at such a kind such an important time for people. And we had a number of really fantastic comments from the last section, and we've just kind of taken some of these and collated them because I think they're really important to feed into the discussion that we're about to have now. One was by Mariana from Carver Haggard, who raised a really important point about local authorities' communication channels being dominated by the health crisis information. That's something we've also definitely experienced as well. I'm sure lots of those in the audience will have as well. Another was by Khadija. I've actually assumed who you are, Khadija, because I feel like I know you. But if you're not, if this isn't you and you're not even here, then apologies. Who said, how do you engage anyone about a future that's so uncertain? I thought that was a really pertinent point. Gonzalo also raised a point saying, is there any opportunity through digital platforms to create remote collaborations that produce physical things? And I think that's also a really important strand that's going to run through some of our guests' presentations. Olive, who was a student, asked a really amazing question, but also raised a really good point about architecture usually housing meetings that would have otherwise been in community spaces. What direction would architecture take when this is all over? And that's a really important thing about thinking about the future. Tom, Brick by Brick, had a really good example of what was going on in one of his projects. He said, I have a public consultation for the next month on an infill scheme in a dilapidated estate in South London with lots of transient residents. We've been really struggling to attract residents to attend events, and hosting the next one online won't make it any easier. Any thoughts on routes for digital outreach with communities like this? So really important point, but also one that I'm sure, an experience I'm sure is being shared by lots of those in local authorities at the moment. So before we get into our guests, just very briefly, because the landscape has shifted and the landscape has also changed and people have been adapting to the current circumstances, a number of different really exciting initiatives on this topic have also arose, and these are just a few. One is by the urban planning team in Columbia University, who've collated a kind of pandemic urbanism library, which is kind of free to access and involves a number of different really amazing pieces of literature on the topic as well, and as well as kind of responses and urban responses to past topics. A post-COVID-19 Urban Futures webinar series by the Bartlett Development Planning Unit, hosted by Catalina Ortiz and Giovanna Astolfo, has been a really important kind of resource in this last week as well, about not just how London is dealing with things, but how the rest of the world is, and that's something that I think we'll talk about with the guests today as well. Public Practice on the 5th of May is doing an engagement at a distance conference, which looks at how local authorities are dealing with the issue. And then finally, the New Economics Foundation, their weekly briefings have been a really important part of informing people and informing also initiatives in this new environment. Lastly, because the city hasn't died and because the city, because outside still exists and is being used, but just being used differently, different initiatives are being formed as we speak. One of them is one that I found yesterday, Tactical Urbanistas in North London, in North East London, who had been doing, who kind of implemented different forms of tactical urbanism related to social distancing at this present time. And I thought those are really kind of important examples to share. So now enough chatting from me and Seth, and we've got three really important guests. We're really excited to have the three guests that we're going to have, and I'll introduce them one by one, I think, rather than doing it all right now. I've been saying important a lot. Important is like an adjective I'm saying a lot. I won't say important. The first is AJ Haastrup. He's a project designer at Everyone Every Day at Participatory City, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how Participatory City, a group embarking, have been dealing with the lockdown and been engaging in this time as well. So without further ado, AJ, I'll pass it.
Wait, hold on. Before you start, Akil, so the process that we're going to have is each speaker is going to give about 10 minutes, and then we can take kind of one or two questions directly at the end if you want something that's related to their work, and then we're going to open up the discussion to everyone, so all the panelists, including ourselves as well. So that's going to be more of like a raise your hand. But if you have a question for any of the speakers, please message myself, Akil, or the Architecture Foundation, and then we'll kind of bring them up at the end of their talk. Thank you all. All right, AJ, over to you.
Cheers. Thank you so very much. And I'm just going to share my screen to show you my presentation. But how's everyone doing today? So yes, so my name is Haastrup. I'm a project designer for Everyone Every Day, part of the Participatory City Foundation. As Akil mentioned, we are a project based in Barking, Dagenham, East London. So we've been about since 2017, November, and it's a 5-year project with the whole point of building community cohesion through practical participation projects. So this could look like gardening, cooking, great big street parties, and so on and so forth. In 2017, we started with 2 shops, one in Barking and one in Dagenham. And so these are based on like street corners and high streets, with the whole point of being as localized as possible. Shortly after that, a shop opened in Marksgate, which again is just another part of the borough. And then throughout the 2.5 years I've been together, we've now got 5 shops and a big makerspace in Barking. So what you can see is the makerspace, which was a big printing station before we moved in. And on the left, you can see like the 3D images of what we imagined the space to be before it opened up. So this was in March 2019 when it opened. It had a big launch festival with around 300 people coming together. And now it's open and it's up and running with kids, families, schools coming together, doing various projects from 3D cutting masks for activities that they want to see happening in their community. I think the main difference that you can see with this makerspace, that traditional makerspaces could be a little bit more dominated spaces. And I think with the nature of the project, it's really democratized the people that have access to the space and the kind of activities that happen. So as you can see, there's children to families, but also all sorts of demographics taking part. So it's been a great thing to see. And I'm actually based in the White House. So that's been a really, really nice part of the project right now. I think one of the main things that makes the project different as well is that the projects that you can see that happen are run by residents themselves. So me as a facilitator, we meet residents and try to speak to them on their skills and what their interests are. And with the aim that we act as a support platform that feeds into this bigger ecosystem of various projects happening. And then the project doesn't fund the small projects in itself, it's the support platform that gets funded. So that's how it works. And in essence, through the support platform, people can have their own agency and create projects on their own terms. And I think that's the biggest difference that we can see what happens there. Again, this is kind of where we kind of fit in with like the civic engagements that people recognize, but participation culture is something that is a little bit new to people. And again, it's that thing of people creating projects on their own terms and with their own agency, which is different in terms of like things being delivered to people. So it's that equal footing and people realizing that they have shared ownership and creating things together. These are some of the newspapers that we use to deliver some of the programs. So part of what happens is that in the shop locations, people come together and discuss what their interests are in, and we create a 2-month program which discusses or which depicts all the activities that people are come up with. So you can see like we've had over like 6 newspapers, and it runs in autumn, spring, and summer. I'm going to be really quick. And then this is kind of the variety of things I can see. So it's like from building chicken coops to having the community dinners, beekeeping, making, amending, sharing. So it takes on so many different directions, and it's really, really, really beautiful. But as you can imagine, in times of COVID, what we thrive on is that physical contact and people coming together, and that has come to a halt. So what has happened is that we've built a digital platform, which in essence does all of the things that we do in the shops online now. So people can start projects, host them on Zoom, create different teams where they can discuss and plan projects together. And the beautiful thing about this is that it's kind of, I think Akil mentioned how the city has changed as well. Where we were so localized, sometimes where people are like stuck in their localities. Now that there's a real melting of people coming together from different shops that might have never met otherwise. So I think that's been a really, really interesting point to notice on this thing. This platform is open, and it's not just for people with Parkinson diagnoses, so anyone can join this. So also we can view this kind of digital platform as a beautiful directory that is open, fun, and what do you call it, hopeful. I think I don't know if everyone decided, but there's like this social contract. People understand this place is for positivity, for inspiration, and for helping each other out. So as you can see, it's like staying safe during Corona times, but also organizing, working together, and kind of imagining what could happen after this time. And as you can see, there's like little people create their profiles and can say why they're there and what they're interested in, but also create things like the kids hour, where like 20 odd kids come together on Zoom calls with their parents and create a lava lamp. So it's been really interesting to see the varied projects actually happening online. But I think, as Akil mentioned, there is that danger that if we focus too much on the positives, that we can kind of forget who gets marginalized in these situations. So there's people without internet access and so on and so forth. So I'm going to slide one more time. So again, I think there's something I love about the convivial conversations that happen in comments. So something about YouTube comments, you don't really want to go on YouTube comments, but these comments here get really, really sweet when you can see Solomon. I know him actually really well. He's a 60 or like 90-year-old man, and he's on this platform discussing like what he can remember then about snakes and ladders like 60 odd years ago. So it's like really, really beautiful to see these kind of conversations still happening in COVID times. And on the right, you can see like the different street teams people can create to bring that community together and share information and resources. So it's been a really, really useful thing. And I think shout out to the team for turning around so fast as well, because I think this rolled out literally March the 16th. So this was like on the day the like lockdown went in. So I think the team did a really good job on bringing that all out. This is just kind of random, but also as a project designer, I love seeing like what the grassroots people are doing as well. So it's like what kind of projects people can emulate in their localities, and what people are doing on the ground to really bring forth like community activities. So this is a virtual school started by Safi, one of my friends, and I've been helping out on that as well. But it's like in short, it's trying to rethink what schools can be in this time as well. So it can be anything from a workout to painting, to yoga, to a book club. And it's been really interesting in terms of like different communities come together. And that idea of learning in this time where you're stuck at home, how can you rethink what learning and what a school is and try to relax that and make it like a community of self-directed learners. So that's been really cool. The lockdown diaries as well, that's a lady called Adriana, which kind of tried to create like a collective diary. So where diary keeping is like a solemn activity where we all have to share the experience. Can we create something together? So it's like anonymous entries about how people are feeling. And it's really, really interesting as well to get like a beautiful insight into like the actual temperature of what's happening in the situation. The Love London Lockdown, again, it's like a community director of things that are going on. Again, but it's like that grassroots element feel that is really beautiful. And then I'll just shout out insights and ideas at the end, which is a kind of more polished version of trying to engage people through like graphic design in terms of like what's happening as well. So a culture of curiosity and learning. So that's been really, really interesting. So that I'm trying to keep my ears and eyes on the ground to see what people are doing in their communities to really make a difference. And now I'm going to go. This was kind of like a brain dump that I had when all these thoughts came to me, like, what does it mean to try to design a project in these times? So I'm just going to pick out a couple. The volatility of experiences and timing, I guess, that kind of thing. Or something might be good tomorrow, but then bad the next day. And it's like, how do you feel about that? And it's as a designer, engage with people, it's just something to be aware of. And I talked about convivial spaces, like where everything's now scheduled and very formal. How do you still create those authentic spaces virtually? So that's really interesting, something to think about. The idea of digital architecture as well. How do you find things, and how do people navigate the space with so much information? What different roles can architecture and facilitators play in that kind of space? And then I think the last thing I'll mention is like the borough has changed as well. So it's like now people are meeting across. Borders doesn't matter. What does that mean for the borough, and how can you have a shared story and bring people together around that stuff? And I think there was a comment around how do you engage people around the future and like positivity and thinking past this time. I think one of the beautiful things is like just always coming from a place of hope. And and just trying to always stay on that positive footnote, because these things will come to a pass, and it's like the experiences and what we did together is the thing that will get us past this point. So I think holding that close to you when you're talking to people, you almost become more of like a counselor in different ways, but it's like understanding that the projects and tools that you have that you can create is what takes people's minds off these things. I think that's it for me in terms of like what I have to discuss today. So I'll invite any questions and other things. I think there's one thing I didn't mention as well, like the council played an amazing role in organizing community organizations, and it's called DDCAN. So they collected different community leaders and organizations and kind of assigned them to different regions. And the council identified the people most in need in terms of like risk of isolation and not getting like food packages. So like these community leads are now coordinating volunteer groups from the different region and organizing like food packages to get to those people most in need. So again, it's been like a beautiful story. Oh, and one last thing, somebody talked about how can we still create physical things remotely. I think one of the beautiful things that happened through the network is people started suggesting like sending like 3D patterns to the makerspace for things to be created from PP, personal protective equipment, and so on and so forth. So there's that kind of thing where things can be designed remotely, sent to the makerspace, and then through the different networks get sent to the people most in need of these things. So I think that's something that's still like in the nascent stages of like being organized, but it's a possibility now because of having this like local makerspace present. I think that's it for me now. So thank you so much, people.
Thank you, Joel. Fantastic and crazy interesting. So wait, Seth, are you gonna, or should we just go straight on to Joel? You're blocked. You're muted, mate.
I haven't got any questions into my DMs. I don't know if you have, but don't be shy to send over the questions if you've got them, or we'll wait till the end and collate them at the end. So yeah, I think we will to Joel.
Okay, so next over is Joel De Mowbray. Joel is the cycling and walking policy lead at Lambeth, also part of the organisation Future Brixton, which I think you're going to talk a little bit more about. Joel, do you want to unmute yourself?
Easy. So yeah, the old walking and cycling thing is a couple jobs ago now. So since then, I took on a project called the Brixton Livable Neighbourhood, which is what I'll talk about. If I can share my screen with you, it'll help on a couple things. You can see that, yeah? Nice.
So you can see it started. Oh yeah, there you go. You're on.
Lovely. So yeah, I'll mainly focus on talking about the Brixton Livable Neighbourhood, which was a project that had quite a large area spanning around kind of Brixton to Clapham North, up to kind of Loughborough Junction, Herne Hill, as you can see on the map. What we're trying to achieve through here is safe, healthy streets, all that usual garb that you've probably heard from plenty of people in plenty of councils in terms of making streets that are safer, better for walking, better for cycling, etc. But especially in this area of Brixton, there's quite a history of, I think it'd be unkind to say bungles, but definitely things just not going right. So for example, in 2015, the council did a major kind of traffic overhaul of the Loughborough area. And for one reason and another, that really sank. It didn't really land at all. And I think fundamentally, the reason that didn't land is because they listened to the people that shouted prior to the thing going in, and didn't really do the deep and far-reaching engagement that AJ's chatting about, that Resolve have chatted about. And what it meant is that when they actually did it, everyone in the area that hadn't really been hit by that engagement just rolled up and was like, what the hell is going on? So, you know, we knew that we needed to hear all of the voices before we started to try and do something, because I'm sure a lot of people on this chat are familiar with the fact that self-selection, you know, where your engagement audience is self-selecting, you tend to get a very specific demographic. It tends to be older, whiter, broadly speaking. And in this scenario, at least, that was the demographic that were keen for it to happen. Email the ward councillors, etc., etc., get it done. But particularly in a very working class, predominantly Afro-Caribbean neighbourhood, they hadn't really chatted to the vast majority of people anyway. So from the outset, the whole principle here was two things. Number one, how can we spend as much of the program budget with local businesses, with local people, and recruit local people to our project team, so that this was a very overtly local project that people could recognize themselves in. And number two was about engaging in a way that overcame that self-selection bias, which is so often a problem for engagement activity, where you've got your project, you've got to get the engagement done, it goes out in a simple way and you get a relatively limited response. So the way we did that is we broke down all of the parts of the job that we had to do, because what we found is we didn't need designers, we didn't need architects, we didn't need transport people or whatever to do a lot of the work. What was far more relevant to this project was having local people that understood the local situation and were able to engage, build relationships and talk to people in a way that anyone with like a transport degree, you can't necessarily take that for granted, that they'll be able to chat to people in a barbershop. So from there, we started to build a team that was more relevant to the people in the area that we're trying to serve. And so with this talk, I kind of want to just make a couple of points. One is about authority, because a local authority might be a formal statutory authority, but that's quite meaningless to the vast majority of people. I want to talk about contact, thinking about contact, because contact is a whole new thing right now. And I want to think about incentives. So I'll start with authority, and that's because I think it's easy to look at authority and think, well, you've got the ward councillors, you've got the cabinet member, you've got all these people that kind of have some kind of formal sense of authority. But actually, one thing that we found more authoritative than anything else in these situations was familiarity, because people trusted and gave authority to the organizations and individuals that they were familiar with. Funnily enough, the more contact an individual had with a formal authority, the less positive they felt about it. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise. The more you have to deal with a council, the more you realize that they're not the best for you. But when it came to individuals in the community, it was a different story. So I'm just trying to move it because Zoom's all up in the way on my tabs. So what we did is we went around to every single business in the whole of the area, and our intention was to visit every single business a minimum of 3 times, because like I'm saying, it's familiarity that creates this kind of authority that we need to be able to talk to people and kind of have a conversation that gets us somewhere. So, for example, this is a map of all the businesses in the Brixton area that we were working with. You visit the first time just to say hello, so you can get a positive kind of relationship going with the people. And I think that is critical, because if you think about trying to engage someone, if you straight off the bat run it down their throat about the project that you're interested in, what's their incentive for getting involved in all that? And what was key to this is we supported every single one of these businesses in one way or another, whether it was getting a trim at the barbers or having lunch there or whatever it was. We kind of went out of our way to use all of these businesses and make sure that they saw that we're people, we're customers, we're personally accountable. It's our face that you can shout at if you've got a problem, and it's us you can talk to if you want to get involved in the project. And so one thing that we did for this, to communicate, because you can have council officers blue in the face trying to explain it to a room full of people that don't want to hear it. And coming back to authority and familiarity, we produced these films that we paid a local film production company that are entirely staffed by people that live in a Loughborough neighbourhood to produce this film. Everyone in it is from the Loughborough area, and local people selected individuals that they felt represented authority to them. And so John Paul there is known for a number of different things. Nev, who you'll see, like, I'd invite anyone to go watch the films. I think they're quite good. Nev is the local shopkeeper. And it's funny, as soon as Nev started chatting, everyone I showed it to is nodding when we're going around these businesses, because they know Nev and they know that he's not going to turn up and nonsense you with some kind of thing. They respect his views because he's been in the community for so long. So I think I've made the point about familiarity, and I'd like to talk about contact. And that brings me back to talking about our businesses, because in terms of like shaping an interaction so that it can be mutually beneficial, you need to think about the setting that that interaction happens in, the dose in terms of the content that you're trying to put across, and like the context and history for that person with engaging with the kind of subject matter that you're talking about. And in this situation, the context, 100% negative. You'd struggle to find a positive experience relating to kind of streets and the council and all that in this area. In terms of the setting, what we were making sure to do is to go to people. I spoke earlier about the self-selection bias that is a problem. So with this, our whole approach was we didn't lay on a single event. We didn't have anything that said like come to us other than the website, but still we took that to people with our tablets. So we had about 245 stakeholders that aren't these businesses. Those are additional different groups that are businesses in the area, stakeholders in the area. And we went to every single one of their events, every single one over that period. So me and my colleague Simone did, I think, like 140 events in a 3-week period, which ended in lockdown. And, you know, those stakeholders see that we're backing them. Instead of getting those stakeholders to come to our event, we were bringing people to their event, boosting their attendance, all that kind of thing. And so I think that landed. And so in terms of being able to engage with those people in a familiar setting that puts them at ease, by managing that contact to a dose that's manageable, addressing directly the history. So just as I've talked about Loughborough and the issues that happened there in the past, this is exactly how we talk about it with local people as well, because they'd say it exactly as I am now. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about was incentives, because I think it's really easy to blindside ourselves with our own incentives on a project and actually think for a second about, hang on, like, why would anyone else get involved in this project? What's in it for them? And I think it's really important to take like a purely economic perspective on it, to think about the social, the economic, and what was that last one? Yeah, the moral incentives, because I think especially for a project that's about cleaner air and stuff like that, you know, someone's incentive to drive a car is largely stimulated by the social value of car ownership and the economic imperative for the benefits that that car gives you. And a lot of these projects tend to try and impose moral incentives on people that are otherwise incentivized by social and economic means. So you're missing the point entirely there. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. And I think I'll wrap it up there. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, but I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you so much, Joel. That was fantastic. And then, again, if any questions, make sure you whack them on the group or to the Architecture Foundation or to me and Seth, and we can get those out. So now lastly but not least, is, I think it's fair to say, one of me and Seth's like favorite initiatives in Europe, in the world, and wherever, the Architecture Thinking School, Elena and Alexander, who do some really fantastic work but are based in Minsk in Belarus. So they're going to talk a little bit about the context at which they're working in now, also in the COVID-19 context as well. So without further ado, I'll give it over to them.
Thank you, Akil. At first, I didn't understand about who you are speaking, and it was wow. Thank you so much. Yeah, we are. My name is Elena. It's Alexander, and we are head of Architectural Thinking School. We are from Minsk, Belarus, a little country in Europe. We will show you our presentation. Maybe we need to first someone, the previous speaker, Joel, to close your presentation, I think. Yeah, okay, we can start.
Thank you, Akil, for the introduction. Thank you for having us here. Again, my name is Alexander Novikov. I'm an architect and I'm the head of the Architectural Thinking School. Now let me turn on my presentation. And I will introduce our school. Yeah, that's the name, Architectural Thinking School for Children. And we started 4 years ago in 2016. And we've been working for 4 years already. We're working with the children 6 to 13 years old. And that is our program. These are just 3 years, but the program was designed for 7 years. The idea of the school is that we teach architectural thinking as a tool of understanding the global contemporary world. We took architects' work as a model, since architects possess lots of skills and knowledge. They design, they research, they combine different disciplines when they design, and that was what we took as a model. And you can see this scheme that is our program, and all these different colors are different studios, such as architecture, illustration, design, object design, sociology, lots and lots of different studios, and they're all connected in one big program. All the studios are run by specialists in their fields, and we have lots of them, around 50 here. Around 50 here, you can see 36 of them. And what next? With each year, our projects were becoming more and more ambitious. We recently published our own book. Then we made around 6 exhibitions, quite big, with our students. Then we were preparing for the Venice Architecture Biennale. And until recently, we had around 110 students in our school. But in March, things have changed. Now my presentation will be a little bit more personal, and it'll change the genre, and it'll be more like a diary, a personal diary, where you can see some political events as well. On the 25th of March, this head of the World Health Organization said that the pandemic is accelerating, and by that time, Venice Architecture Biennale and even the Olympic Games were postponed. But not all the things in your life could be postponed. We were to get married with Elena, and it was planned a long time ago. So we had to go on with this stuff. And I did this Zoom bachelor party together with my friends. They were all in their houses, in their countries, but we sort of gathered together and had this party. And on the 27th of March, we had our wedding. No guests for sure, only a photographer friend who made pictures. On the 28th of March, one of our officials said that there are no viruses here in Belarus. But things has become more dangerous with each day, so to speak. On the one hand, officials were not very responsive to the situation, but that situation made the local communities to be more active. And people started raising money through the online platforms such as crowdfunding, and gathering money to for example, buy masks and deliver them to different cities in Belarus. That is the current situation in Belarus. You can see around 11,000 people are they have COVID right now, but there is no quarantine. So there is no official quarantine, but at the same time there is an unofficial one, because once you go out on the street, you cannot see lots of people there. When you see them, they are wearing masks. Lots of restaurants are closed. So the unofficial quarantine is at work. And like I said, we had 110 students before COVID-19, but the situation changed, and we sort of we had to reinvent our school again, because you cannot easily transfer to online and take all these 110 students to online, because you sort of have to win their trust again. They have to believe that it is working. So we had to start from the scratch, like we did 4 years ago. And me and Yelena started teaching again. But to be honest, Yelena was mostly teaching. I was helping. But I will tell you about one of the workshops that I did together with children. There were 2 versions of it. I wanted to make something which is important right now today, and I came up with this idea of the name of the workshop is Anti-Corona, where we together with children via Zoom gathered together, and I first there was some theory where I was explaining what is happening right now, some words about the plague, about the pandemics in the history, and then I told them how the architects responded to these pandemics and what they did to sort of stop these pandemics. And then we slowly moved to coronavirus, and then we started designing the hospitals for the biggest cities in the world, Tokyo, London, by the way, Paris, and so on. And yeah, there were a few versions of this workshop. The last one was yesterday, by the way. And there were beautiful ideas. We came up with the ideas of the hospitals that are not permanent. They're sort of made for the period of COVID-19. And there were beautiful ideas. One of them, for example, for New York, where the building, the hospital was floating. It was sort of connected to the Empire State Building, and this hospital, a floating one, was reminding the Zeppelin. So it sort of reminds of the older New York Times with this flying Zeppelins. Another project was, I cannot show all the pictures because children did not send me these pictures, but yeah, I will just go through some of the ideas. Another project that I really liked was designed for Shanghai. The student had the idea of making an artificial island in the river in the center of Shanghai, and he called it Shanghaieta, which is the word coming from Shanghai and Lazareta, which you know this island where Lazareta where Lazaret was born. And that's it. Now I will pass the microphone to Yelena.
Okay, I will tell a bit about how process changed in our school, because usually during our classes we have a maximum 12 students and 2 teachers. One of teacher is, we call it head, and another teacher is more like soul, and he is all the time with these children during all the classes, no matter which class is this, sociology or biology or architecture. And we also, we are using all the time the same scheme, like a bit theory on the beginning, then practice, and then for sure coffee, tea break or fruit break, we can call it. And the final presentation where children could speak about their projects and analyze them with their friends together. And also we tried, in usual time, we try to go outside. Sometimes we try to, for example, here you see how we explore the plan of the city from one of the highest points in Minsk, or we go to some architectural studios. Here is the main state studio, which is responsible for urban planning of the Minsk. And yeah, we do usually a lot, not in just in summer, but we do a lot of some outside courses. For example, it was like traditional architectural courses where we went to some old village as a museum and explored traditional architecture. But with online format, everything changed. And we had to invent something new for sure. And we had to invent something new very fast because our last semester needed to be started. And during maybe 4 or 5 days, we called all our parents. How are you doing? What is your plan? Because yeah, officially we had no quarantine as now. We don't have official quarantine. We spoke with them, and it's interesting that even it was like 25 of March, half of parents said us, no, we want only lessons offline. We will go to your place. We want real lessons. But in a few days, for sure, everything changed in their minds, and they wanted only to go online. But with this, we lost like 60% of our students because of different reasons. For some of the parents, it sounded like, oh, the next headache, I need to work with Zoom, I need to help with this Zoom application, I need to help maybe my kid, and we all staying at home now. So, okay. But we started our quarter, and I will show you one little video how it was the presentation at the end of our lesson, in which we created, we drew some nature, Belarusian nature, and we created some poesy, some little poems about it. You will see now.
Очень любит трудиться. И может такое случиться, что из-за песен ее кому-то не спится. И бабушка, взяв в руки спицы, любит слушать песни синицы.
Вот это да, ребята, класс. Отлично.
It's in Russian, but at least you understand that it works. And for me, I explored, like new instruments which I didn't use before. For example, I had a class of land art, and I thought, why not to make a little trip for different parts of the world. And with the Google View, we went with the students in Nazca, for example, to see geoglyphs of Nazca, geoglyphs, I think. And then we went to United Kingdom to see some art of Andy Goldsworthy. And then we went to Burning Man to see some art there. And the children were really fascinated. And actually, without this online situation, I would not even think about that we can make journeys like this. And so, what I thought that in this situation we were all locked down, but we have but we are all in the same situation, and we have all the same opportunities. During our lessons, we now invite some of our friends, architects from different countries, just for 5 minutes or 10 minutes to speak a bit with our students. And this is really something motivating for our students. To see someone from Berlin or someone from even from Russia. We cannot afford ourselves to invite on usual offline lessons someone from Russia just for a few days or for a few minutes. And also the important thing for us was to make children move somehow, because it's even not allowed to spend 1 hour maximum. It's like 20 or 25 minutes for children to be near the screen. So we do all the time breaks, and we try to make these breaks funny. For example, we will show you how we dance sometimes with our students. Okay, we need to We need to load it. For some of them, we say, okay, you can rest now. You can. Not everyone wants to dance. It's okay. Someone just leave for 10 minutes. Someone dancing with us and so on. So that's it, you know. And for me, what I think now, I think that no, I wanted to say the most interesting thing now is with the group which has to make a movie. They have a quarter of cinema, and they need to make a movie somehow during 14 lessons. But we have a great film director who is working with us, and he said, like, okay, I like this challenge. I will make everything online. Actually, even me, I don't understand exactly how he will do this, because, okay, making a scenario altogether online, it's okay, but how to make shootings? But he said he will make it with the help of our children. It will be okay. And for me, what I see now, that children became much more responsible, and, you know, like much more grown up, and they became more independent, and they you know, they like this like adult life where it's permitted for them to use computer as a tool, as not something which is usually forbidden by their parents. And I see like they became like very, very self-organized. So I think after this gap, which will end, I hope, soon, our students, and I'm sure that all children which will have this experience of online education will make a huge jump on kind of next level of self-organizing and independence. Yeah, it's like this. I think that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank
you so much. So we're pressed for time. So if you want to chat,
Well, I don't know. How are we looking for time, Rosie?
I think we're good. Like, we can just carry on for a little bit more.
So we have got a couple of questions. Only a few questions. So don't be shy if you've got any questions coming in. Thank you again to all the speakers who've shown us their really, really interesting work. So the first question is from Maureen Harvey to Joel, and it's to ask for an example of moral incentive that you've encountered.
So, for example, if we're trying to, well, this is what you find a lot of the time with a consultation by a moral incentive. They might say, you know, we need to reduce our dependency on private vehicles because of its environmental impact, the safety impact, and all of those things really are kind of more of a moral incentive to the individual involved, because it doesn't benefit them in kind of any like a social or an economic way for that change to happen, unless you rephrase the project in economic or social terms, which is what we've tried to do. Hope that answers the question.
Very good, very good. And then next we've got a question coming in from our very own Melissa Hanif, who I imagine might just jump on the mic.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for your talks. They're really interesting. I've got two questions, but actually Architecture Thinking School might have answered the question I had for you. So I'll start with the first one, which is to both AJ and Joel. It's to do with like the saturation of engagement initiatives right now. And I think my fear is that organizations are kind of losing their essence and their own individual voice and their own tone. And so my question was to you guys is, how are you kind of keeping that tone, and how are you kind of reaching out to the very like specific and tailored communities that you were initially, rather than just going straight onto the masses, which I think is like the easiest option to do. So is it like to your graphics or the platforms that you're using? Like, how are you still reaching out to those communities?
I can go first, potentially. I guess one of the good things that we had was like two and a half years worth of like work and engagement with a very specific audience of Barking and Dagenham. So I guess through that, we've got very close bonds with people that we interact with almost every day. So in terms of keeping that natural culture and the people that we're speaking to and like the tone that we have, through the platform it became easier. It was just another place to have the same conversation. So we went through our mailing list, through our graphics, we changed our websites, and just let everyone know. And it's been a constant conversation. Even today, we're still telling people about this new online platform because there is so much things going on. I think it's like, it's almost necessary to remind people that like through the noise that they can still hear it. We have separate residence groups as well that we work with closely, that we can like filter information through WhatsApp groups. So I think I think it's through those kind of close bonds that this has been possible to, instead of like having to do too much work in terms of reaching the masses. We're a very, very localized project in that terms. And because we work with residents directly and it's their projects that are coming out, like we're all speaking to residents to come out with their things and to share with the public. So I think it's been a very natural process in that thing in those terms. I think the opportunity that we see is that there's more information out there that could benefit local residents. So I think there's a little bit more of like the outside, like now is a chance to really, do some outside facing work. So yeah, it's been a nice time in those terms. Anything else? Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you.
A couple of ways that we do it on our side is, number one is like we're there physically, like so far anyway. Previously we were there physically, and that is a difference because a lot of the reach out doesn't necessarily happen on a face-to-face basis. And we make sure we got a mobile number, they can always contact us. And we go to places that people don't normally go. So for example, we try to seek out where people are when they have time to talk, thinking about like, a lot of the time we might be trying to hassle people in a setting where they're actually quite busy. And so for example, like the best places that we found were the laundrette, because you're just waiting for it to spin. So, you ain't going nowhere. And the barbershop as well has been really superb. But then particularly in this time, when this all hit, our motive was, what can we do now to be here for these people? And so like we finished our engagement about 2 weeks before lockdown. And then as we knew it was kind of getting towards that point, we started establishing the ability for the businesses that we've worked with to transfer their businesses online. And for one reason or another, that kind of snowballed into a borough-wide food distribution operation that I'm running now, inadvertently. But through that as well, we're working with like all of the stakeholders that were there to make sure that they've got clear referral routes for vulnerable people in their community. So, I think the thing that makes our identity, compared to other organizations, because you're absolutely right about the saturation of it, is the fact that we're there and we make sure that we're there to support people in a very tangible way. And I think when this all goes down, like we were there, like when you needed us, we were there. And when we go and talk to people, we say up front, like, don't believe me, we'll chat in 2 years and hopefully it'll be positive. You know what I mean? It's like, rate us when we're done. Don't just like, believe us. Keep your cynicism until we've shown you otherwise.
Yeah, I hear that.
Thank you very, very much. Then we've got a question from Emily Temperton. I think the Architects Foundation is going to unmute you, so it's a long question. So
you're unmuted now, Emily.
Oh, right. Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a little bit of a long question. Okay, so the short question is, how do you replicate those informal conversations digitally? Basically, the importance of on-the-ground research, particularly through the livable neighbourhoods projects and some of your own projects as well. How do you go about replicating those informal conversations?
As I said, it's been a little bit of, I feel like the good thing that we have with the kind of projects that we have, they're very practical. So like you're always making something, it's either making a lava lamp, making food together. And I guess through doing things with your hands and these common denominator things, people do have space to talk. So like naturally those conversations do happen. That conversation, I feel like the kind of free roam that you can see on the platform where people can actually just comment on each other's things and things happening in real time, and us like actually initiating some of those conversations with just some free thought has really given that space for those kind of conversations to start. But I would definitely say it's not the same just yet, but in parts you can see it sparking. So I think it's still a challenge, but I guess it's just giving people that license to actually be heard, be seen through different mediums. So I guess like Zoom has been a great thing that we've been using so people can actually see each other. And the posts, I think the way the platform is organized is like, what's on your mind? Why am I here? All these really personal kind of questions which bring out those things that people don't naturally always say in online things. People are coming with them with their authentic selves on these platforms. And I guess it's like because of the culture that was translated in the shops that's now seeped into the online platform. For us, anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's quite a different conversation potentially with, I guess the platform was already set up in a physical form with everyone every day. So I was just wondering, I guess, if anyone's come across anything where you're sort of starting the initial phases of the research really and haven't necessarily got those connections established already.
Can you say a bit more about what the project or piece of research is?
Oh, what, me? Well, I guess it's just the practice I work for, and we do quite a lot of work to do with engagement really, and so we're just trying to explore this at the moment. So I was just, we're just trying to think about what kind of platforms we start using to kind of try and to start those research processes and replicate some of those conversations. So I guess I was just interested to hear some experience with the use of different platforms really.
I think AJ's probably way better on the kind of digital platform side of thing. But one thing to chuck in the mix from my side is depending on the type of community that you're working with and the types of kind of community organizations that are there, if you're able to speak with people through the phone and try and understand, for example, if things like befriending and social isolation are issues that they're trying to resolve, or if there's a way that you could use and tailor what you're trying to learn from people into a format that actually contacts people that are feeling isolated and would actually otherwise benefit from a call. And I think no doubt, wherever you are, I'm sure there are community organizations that will be able to hook that kind of thing up if you can commit just as much time to helping them as the time that you commit to achieving what you're in it for.
Yeah, I'll reiterate what Joel's saying. Like, I don't know about the deadlines you have for your research, but if there could be like a period of like stepping down in terms of like formal research and like what does meeting people look like, and what other partnerships can you meet and see in the area that are doing similar things? And I think that's what Joe's talking about, and like work together on just meeting some of the things that they're trying to achieve, because I think different localities at different points with this as well. So just understanding like what the council's saying, what are their priorities, and then, but local people are always active. That's one thing you'll realize, that there's always people wanting to do something positive. So I feel like starting from that point, that you can guarantee there'll be 10 people in that area that want to do something positive to help out or something engaging. So
the madness I feel of this whole situation is that you've got like a small minority of the population on the most rapidly spinning hamster wheel you've ever seen, parallel to the vast majority of the population that are the most static they've ever been in their lives. And so just as AJ is saying, like, you will find that energy if you can find the right channels to reach them people.
And experiment, like I would say, so depending on the demographics. I think one of the things that we realized is that Facebook in our area was something that is very prevalent, and like local communities still use Facebook very, very heavily to communicate. But depending on your thing, like things like Instagram have been a great resource for people to connect and find things and start some conversations. So I think be bold with like your experimentation and how you want to speak to these people and throw some things out there. And don't be afraid to show yourself. I think one of those things that we've seen as that's been working is like, usually we are a little bit more in the background, but now staff can also comment themselves a little bit more on these platforms. So don't be afraid to show yourself a little on what you've got. Yeah.
Very nice. Okay, so I reckon we've got time for one more question. And Elena and Alex, I'm going to direct this at you. So this is a long question that's come from the man himself, Finn Harper. I'll do the introduction first. In my darker moments, I feel like the slow and steady, highly consultative and participatory British political approach has contributed us to having the highest COVID death toll in Europe. Sometimes I'm envious of the more decisive courses of action we've seen in China and South Korea. Are there ways we can be both participatory with community engagement and decisive, proactive, and fast to act? So to summarize, can we include people along the journey but be fast and decisive in the way that we act?
Is that to everyone?
To everyone, yeah.
Oof. So just repeat the question one more time. Inclusive, decisive.
Can we be inclusive and participatory, but also decisive, proactive, and fast to act?
I'm going to say yes. In the UK at the moment, we've got temporary legislation that allows us to act kind of from a traffic perspective a lot quicker than we normally could. And also, like, engagement, whatever kind of capacity you're doing it, if it's with a statutory authority or for a project that has a legal obligation to engage, I think generally people go way over the top on engagement where they don't already have that kind of baseline relationship with the community to be able to just understand that people are going to back it. And so where we're working in Lambeth, the engagement that we did over the course of February, over the next 4 weeks, we're going to stick in what we intended to do in 2 years. And, you know, maybe offline, if anyone's interested, we could say a bit more about the practicalities of how you do it.
Akil, you're on mute. I can see you, Chan.
I was going to say, Alex and Elena, do you want to go for it?
Could you please again ask the question?
Okay.
Because it's a bit tricky for us.
Yeah, it's a tricky one for everyone. Finn's thrown us a curveball. So I guess, well, in your experience, I guess it's a bit more about the kind of the way that you've adapted your practice. But the question is, can you find a way to be inclusive and to bring people on that journey, but also decisive and fast in the way that you act with this COVID response?
It is hard to say. I mean, right now we've been working with these people that we've been working for 4 years, and nothing has changed during this transfer. And I mean, the people are the same, and just maybe I don't know. In a way.
I could tell that actually we plan to do online program. We even wrote it like absolutely different. We plan to do it in January or February, and then we were exhausted, you know, like after making our book and so on. But and it's a bit ironic that we in March we had to make something online, and for us this online situation is absolutely inclusive, because before we had a lot of questions from parents from all over Belarus, not from other countries, but from all of other Belarus. They asked us, will you open your school in my city or in my city? And we didn't want to make a lot of our schools which we cannot control, and we could not. I understand that we could not control the level of education in some other cities. So we are more local, you know, and we like to control and to participate by ourselves in all the process. And with this online situation, we can propose these parents to, okay, you wanted to go in our school, you can go now, you can have these online classes as our usual students, and we are responsible for the level of these courses. And yeah, for me, this online situation is absolutely inclusive. And we want to launch in a few weeks, some online courses, but in English. But okay, it's very ambitious plans. But yeah, I think it's absolutely yeah. And for some, and even for some students which are in Minsk, it was too much exhausting to go after school, to go to our school, because they need to rest, they need to eat before, and the road is not simple, and so on and so on. And now it's much more easy for them. And yeah, I see a lot of pluses in this situation. For kids, I see a lot of pluses.
If I had to put my, thank you so much. If I had to, I feel like 100%. I think, judging from our situation, there's things that you need to be decisive on, and things that so like closing down all our shops and physical spaces was something that we need to be decisive on. But then immediately we had the plan B, which was the digital platform, which was inclusive and which also brought people along on the journey. But I think it's just how you understand your work streams and your conditions, and how you prioritize the things that you need to make happen. I think there's a level of adaptation that we need to do to be decisive on, in terms of understanding need and the crisis, but also like what is our core function and what we're here to do, and holding that very close to us as well, because that adaptation shouldn't take over like what the overall project is. So I think the decisiveness needs to come from like the priorities and how you fit into the wider context of the situation. But also like we're fortunate in terms of how we're designed, that it's in like 100% participatory in everything that we do. So it's like, yeah, it's not something that we're like, our practice brings people in like that. So yeah, that's what I have to say on that.
Very good. Very, very good. A nice challenging one, nice meaty one for us to finish on. I don't know, Akil, if you got any final words.
Nah, just thank you to everyone who came, and thank you to all the guests as well. Like a really amazing array of projects. Obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to email Architecture Foundation. You can email them with the emails, or we can chat to them on the thing for the 5 seconds we have before we close down. But honestly, thank you so much, everyone. And let's keep the conversation going. You know what I mean? Like let's just keep being out here, keep doing our thing, and you know.
Go on, man. Thank you so much, people.
Thank you very much.